The phone rang just as I was about to lock up the clinic for the night. It was one of those moments that you just know is going to change everything. I hesitated, staring at the caller ID that read Mom. My stomach churned. We hadn't spoken in months, and even then, it was more of a terse exchange than a conversation. Harper, came her crisp voice, cutting through the silence of the clinic. Your father is in the hospital. It's serious. I felt my heart drop. My name is Harper Calloway, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been a complicated dance between duty and defiance. Especially when it comes to my mother, Evelyn. Is he okay? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He's stable for now, but you should come. He needs you, she replied, her words laced with an unspoken expectation. There it was. Not a request, but a demand. Memories of past betrayals flooded back, like when I was 19 and pregnant, and Evelyn decided that my future was more important than my choice. Her version of love always came with strings attached, and I was tired of being her marionette. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the tide of emotions. I'll be there, I said, knowing I had to see my father, Thomas, the silent bystander in Evelyn's schemes. Hanging up, I leaned against the counter, the sterile smell of disinfectant doing little to calm my racing mind. My father, with his quiet presence, had always been my ally, even if he rarely stood up to Evelyn. The thought of him ill and vulnerable tugged at my heart more than I wanted to admit. As I drove home, the streetlights blurred into streaks of gold against the darkening sky. I thought about the last time I was at my parents' house, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Evelyn's obsession with appearances had always been at odds with my desire for authenticity. She wanted a perfect daughter to match her perfect life, but I had other plans. Marcus, my husband, was waiting for me when I got home. His warm smile and steady gaze were a balm to my frayed nerves. Hey, what's going on? He asked, noticing the worry etched on my face. I sighed, dropping my keys on the table. It's Dad. He's in the hospital. Mom wants me to come. He nodded, pulling me into a comforting embrace. Do you want me to come with you? I shook my head. No, I need to do this alone. But thank you. Marcus understood. He always did. He knew the tangled web of my family dynamics and the emotional toll it took on me. Call me if you need anything, okay? I nodded, grateful for his support. As I packed a bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that this visit would be different. There was a tension in the air, a sense of impending confrontation that both scared and invigorated me. The drive to my parents' house felt like a journey into the past. Every mile brought back memories of Evelyn's controlling nature and the pressure to conform to her high standards. But it also reminded me of my father, his quiet support, even when he didn't have the courage to stand up to her. Arriving at the hospital, I was greeted by the sterile scent of antiseptic and the low hum of machinery. My heart pounded as I made my way to my father's room, bracing myself for what I might find. Evelyn was there, her posture rigid, her expression carefully composed. Harper, she said, her voice a mix of relief and something else, something I couldn't quite place. How is he? I asked, bypassing any pleasantries. He's resting, she replied, her gaze flicking to the door behind her. You should see him. I nodded, stepping past her into the dimly lit room. My father lay there, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. Seeing him like this, my heart ached with a mix of love and regret. As I sat by his bedside, I felt a surge of determination. This time, I wouldn't let Evelyn manipulate me. I would be here for my father, but on my terms. Whatever game she was playing, I was ready to face it. Just as I was about to leave the room, Evelyn spoke, her voice low and controlled. Harper, we need to talk about the future. Your father's condition changes everything. Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a threat. I met her gaze, feeling the weight of her expectations clash with my resolve. This was just the beginning, and I knew that whatever happened next would set the course for everything that followed. Walking up the path to my childhood home, I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. The house stood pristine, the garden meticulously manicured. Marcus would appreciate the symmetry, I thought with a faint smile. But to me, it was a facade, a picture-perfect exterior that masked the emotional chaos inside. As I stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers and polished wood. Everything was in its place, just as Evelyn liked it. Harper, she called from the living room, her voice carrying that authoritative edge. I found her arranging a vase of roses, each bloom strategically placed. "You made it," she said, glancing up briefly before returning to her task. Her tone was casual, as if we were discussing the weather, not my father's health. "How's Dad?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "He's resting," she replied, not looking up. "The doctors are hopeful, but he needs peace and stability." I nodded, though I knew what she really meant. Peace and stability were her code for control. I watched her for a moment, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided eye contact. It was as if she was playing a role, the concerned wife, the doting mother, all while orchestrating the scene. "Evelyn," I started, choosing my words carefully, "I want to be here for Dad, but I need to know what's really going on." She paused, finally meeting my gaze. "Everything is under control," she said, her voice smooth. "We just need to keep up appearances, for his sake." For his sake. The words echoed in my mind, a familiar refrain. I felt a flicker of anger, but I swallowed it down. "I'm not here for appearances," I said quietly. Her eyes narrowed slightly, a crack in her polished veneer. "Harper, we all have roles to play. You know how important this is for our family." I bit back a retort, knowing it would only escalate things. Instead, I nodded, though my resolve hardened. This time, I would not be swept into her games. The rest of the day passed in a blur of polite conversations and stilted silences. I checked on my father, who was asleep, his breathing steady but shallow. Seeing him like this, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. I had to be here, but on my terms. Later, as I sat on the porch, Evelyn joined me, a glass of iced tea in her hand. "It's been a while since you were last here," she said, her tone almost conversational. "Yeah," I replied, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "Life gets busy." She nodded, sipping her drink. "I heard you and Marcus are doing well." "We are," I said, feeling a warmth at the mention of his name. "He's been really supportive." "Good," she said, though there was a hint of something else in her voice, envy, perhaps, or regret. "It's important to have someone reliable." I turned to look at her, searching for any sign of sincerity. "Why did you really call me here, Evelyn?" She hesitated, a rare moment of vulnerability flickering across her face. "Harper, I need you to help manage things. The school board is watching, and with your father's condition." There it was. The truth, or at least part of it. Her need to maintain her image, to keep everything looking perfect from the outside. "I'm here for Dad," I said firmly, "but I won't be part of any charade." She stiffened, her composure slipping for just a second. "This is about family," she insisted. "Family," I repeated, the word heavy with irony. "I'm here for Dad, and I'll help where I can, but I won't pretend everything's fine when it's not." Evelyn said nothing, her silence more telling than any argument. As the evening wore on, I felt a shift, a subtle change in our dynamic. I wasn't the compliant daughter anymore, and she knew it. That night, as I lay in my old room, surrounded by remnants of a past life, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Evelyn might want to use Dad's illness as a pawn, but I wouldn't let her. I had my own path to forge, my own story to tell. Before drifting off to sleep, I thought about Marcus, about the life we were building together. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, I felt ready to face them, on my terms, not Evelyn's. And that was a victory in itself. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. I stood by the window, sipping my coffee, trying to brace myself for whatever the day might bring. The air felt heavy, charged with unspoken words and unresolved tensions. I was pulled from my thoughts by a knock on the door. Evelyn entered without waiting for an invitation, her expression a mix of determination and something else, perhaps desperation. "Harper, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight. I turned to face her, setting my coffee down. "About what?" She hesitated, a rare flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "The school board is having a meeting next week. They want to discuss Thomas's condition and how it might affect my position." There it was, the real reason for her urgency. Her image, her status, always at the forefront. And you need me there because? Because it would look better if the family presented a united front, she replied, her words carefully measured. I felt a surge of frustration. You mean if I play along with your version of reality? Harper, she said, her tone softening, this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. The stability of our family. I shook my head, disbelief mingling with anger. Stability? Or control? Her eyes flashed, but she quickly composed herself. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Maybe not, I conceded, but I do understand the pressure you've put on me. On Dad. She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. And what about Logan? Does he know about all this? Her expression tightened at the mention of my ex-boyfriend. Logan has nothing to do with this, doesn't he? I challenged. He was part of your plans before, wasn't he? Evelyn's silence was answer enough. I felt a bitter satisfaction at having hit a nerve. But before I could press further, my father's voice called out from down the hall. I excused myself, leaving Evelyn standing there, her composure cracking. In my father's room, I found him sitting up, looking more alert than he had the day before. Harper, he greeted, his voice warm but weary. Hey, Dad, I said, sitting beside him. How are you feeling? Better, he replied, though his eyes betrayed his fatigue. It's good to see you. We sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken words hanging between us. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. I'm sorry, Harper. For everything. I looked at him surprised. Dad, you don't have to. No, he interrupted gently. I do. I should have spoken up more. I should have been there for you. His admission was like a balm, soothing some of the old wounds. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. As I sat with him, I noticed a stack of papers on the bedside table. Among them was a letter, the handwriting unmistakably his. Curious, I picked it up, glancing at him for permission. He nodded, a resigned look in his eyes. I wrote that a while back. Never had the courage to give it to you. I unfolded the letter, my heart pounding as I read his words of regret and love. He acknowledged his silence, his complicity in Evelyn's schemes, and his desire for me to find my own path. It was a revelation, one that deepened my understanding of him and his struggles. Thank you, I said again, my voice barely a whisper. This means a lot. He nodded, a small, sad smile on his lips. I just want you to be happy, Harper. To live your life. As I left the room, the letter clutched tightly in my hand. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My father's words were a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight, that there was more to our family than Evelyn's manipulations. I found Evelyn in the kitchen, her back to me as she prepared breakfast. I'm going to the board meeting, I announced, my voice steady. She turned, surprise flickering across her face. You will. But not for the reasons you think, I added. I'm going to support Dad, to make sure his wishes are heard. Evelyn's expression hardened, but she nodded. As long as we're on the same page. We're not, I replied, meeting her gaze. And we never will be. With that, I left the room, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with my father's support and my own determination to break free from the past. As I stepped outside, the morning air felt crisp and full of promise. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I felt like I was truly on my own path, and that was a victory worth fighting for. Back at the clinic, the familiar sounds of barking dogs and the hum of activity grounded me, offering a brief respite from the chaos at home. But my mind was still tangled in the web of family drama, and I knew I needed to talk to Marcus. After work, I found him in our small garden, tending to the plants with his usual care. The sight of him, so focused and calm, brought a sense of peace. Hey, I called, walking over to join him. He looked up, wiping his hands on a cloth. Hey, how was your day? Eventful, I replied, leaning against the fence. I need to talk to you about something. He nodded, setting aside his tools. What's up? I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out. I found a letter from my dad. He wrote it a while ago, apologizing for not standing up to Evelyn. It was a lot to take in. Marcus listened, his expression thoughtful. How do you feel about it? Conflicted, I admitted. It's like, on one hand, I'm grateful he acknowledged it. But on the other, It's hard not to feel angry about all the years he stayed silent. He reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. It sounds like he's trying to make amends in his own way. Yeah, I said, nodding. And I want to be there for him. But Evelyn's still trying to control everything. Marcus frowned, a hint of frustration in his eyes. She's using his illness to keep up appearances, isn't she? Exactly, I replied, the words bitter on my tongue. And now she wants me to help her put on a show for the school board. He sighed, shaking his head. You're not obligated to play her games, Harper. I know, I said, feeling a surge of determination. But I can't just walk away. I need to stand up for Dad and for myself. Marcus nodded, his support unwavering. Whatever you decide, I'm here. His reassurance was a balm, giving me the strength I needed. But as I sat there, a new thought struck me, a possibility I hadn't considered. Marcus, I said slowly, what if we start looking into adoption? His eyes widened slightly, surprise mingling with curiosity. Are you sure? I've been thinking about it, I admitted. I want a family, but I want it to be on our terms, not dictated by my parents' expectations. He smiled, a warmth spreading across his face. I'm all in, if that's what you want. His response filled me with hope, a vision of a future free from the shadows of the past. But before I could bask in that feeling, my phone buzzed, pulling me back to reality. It was a message from an unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. The words were like a punch to the gut. Meet me. We need to talk. It's about Evelyn. I showed the message to Marcus, my mind racing. Who do you think it is? He asked, a hint of concern in his voice. I have no idea, I replied, my heart pounding. But I need to find out. The next day, I arrived at the designated meeting spot, a quiet cafe on the edge of town. My mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, none of them comforting. As I scanned the room, I spotted a familiar face, Logan. He waved me over, a look of urgency in his eyes. Harper, he said as I approached, thanks for coming. I sat down wary. What's this about, Logan? He leaned in, his expression serious. It's about Evelyn. She's planning something, and I thought you should know. I frowned, skepticism creeping in. Why tell me now? Because, he said, his voice low, she's using me to keep tabs on you. She's worried you'll disrupt her plans. His admission was like a cold bucket of water, shocking and unwelcome. And you're just going along with it? I was, he admitted, guilt flashing across his face. But I realized it's not right. You deserve to know. I studied him, searching for any hint of deception. Why should I trust you? Because, he said, meeting my gaze, I owe you that much. His words hung in the air, a fragile bridge between past betrayals and possible redemption. I didn't know if I could trust him, but his warning couldn't be ignored. As I left the cafe, my mind was a storm of emotions. Logan's revelation had shifted the ground beneath me, forcing me to reevaluate my next steps. I knew one thing for certain. The stakes were higher than ever, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The sun was setting as I returned home, the weight of Logan's warning still heavy on my mind. I found Marcus in the living room, his laptop open as he worked on a design. He looked up, concern etched on his face. How did it go? I dropped my bag on the floor, running a hand through my hair. Logan told me Evelyn's been using him to keep tabs on me. She's planning something, but he didn't know what. Marcus frowned, closing his laptop. Do you think he's telling the truth? I don't know, I admitted, pacing the room. But I can't ignore it. If Evelyn's up to something, I need to be ready. He stood, crossing the room to pull me into a hug. We'll figure it out, Harper. You're not alone in this. His words were reassuring, but they didn't ease the knot of anxiety in my chest. As much as I wanted to believe Logan, his past betrayals made it hard to trust his motives. Yet the urgency in his voice had been genuine, and that was enough to keep me on edge. The next day, I decided to confront Evelyn. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait for the other shoe to drop. When I arrived at my parents' house, I found her in the garden, pruning the roses with precise, deliberate movements. Evelyn, I called, my voice cutting through the quiet afternoon. She glanced up, a hint of surprise in her eyes. Harper, I wasn't expecting you. I need to talk to you, I said, stepping closer. About Logan. Her expression barely flickered. What about him? He told me you've been using him to keep tabs on me, I said, watching her closely. Is it true? She set down the shears, her gaze steady. Logan is not a reliable source, Harper. You know that. Maybe, I replied, crossing my arms. But I also know you'll do whatever it takes to maintain control. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't deny it. I'm doing what's necessary for our family. For your image, you mean, I countered, frustration simmering beneath my words. What are you planning, Evelyn? She sighed, a calculated move. The board meeting is coming up, and I need to ensure everything goes smoothly. That's all. I shook my head, disbelief mingling with anger. You're using Dad's illness as leverage, aren't you? Her silence was answer enough. I felt a surge of determination, a resolve to protect my father from becoming a pawn in her games. I won't let you manipulate him or me. Harper, she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone, I just want what's best for all of us. Then stop trying to control everything, I shot back. Let us make our own choices. She opened her mouth to respond, but I turned and walked away, my heart pounding. I needed to get out of there before I said something I'd regret. Back at home, I found Marcus waiting for me, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. How did it go? I sank onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me. She didn't deny it. She's using Dad's illness to keep up appearances. He sat beside me, taking my hand. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted, frustration lacing my voice. I feel like I'm caught in a web, and every move I make just tightens it. He squeezed my hand, his presence a steady anchor. We'll find a way through this, Harper. Together. His words were a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. But as the evening wore on, a new thought crept into my mind, a possibility I hadn't dared to consider. What if we go public? I asked, the idea forming as I spoke. Expose Evelyn's manipulation to the board, to the community? Marcus looked thoughtful, weighing the implications. It's a big risk, but it could force her hand. I know, I said, the prospect both terrifying and exhilarating. But it might be the only way to stop her. He nodded, his expression resolute. If that's what you want to do, I'm with you. His support was a balm, giving me the courage to consider the unthinkable. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and the fallout could be severe, but it was time to take a stand. As I lay in bed that night, the weight of the decision settled over me. I was on the brink of a major crisis, one that could redefine everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and justice. But for the first time, I felt ready to face it head-on, determined to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. The community event was in full swing when Marcus and I arrived, the air buzzing with chatter and laughter. It was the kind of gathering Evelyn thrived in, where appearances mattered more than reality. As we entered, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach, knowing what lay ahead. Evelyn spotted us almost immediately, her smile as polished as ever. Harper, Marcus, she greeted, her voice smooth. I'm glad you could make it. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, though the words felt hollow. As the evening wore on, I watched Evelyn work the room, her charm on full display. But beneath the surface, I could sense the tension, the pressure she was under to maintain her facade. It was only a matter of time before the cracks began to show. The opportunity came when Evelyn, in her role as the evening's host, took the stage to make a speech. As she spoke about family values and community, I felt a surge of anger at the hypocrisy of it all. My hands clenched into fists as I listened, the urge to expose the truth almost overwhelming. But it wasn't until she turned her attention to me that the real confrontation began. And let's not forget the importance of legacy, she said, her gaze landing on me. Harper, dear, when will we be hearing the pitter-patter of little feet? The question hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in a seemingly innocent inquiry. I felt Marcus tense beside me, his support a steady presence. But this was a battle I had to fight on my own. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, the room falling silent as all eyes turned to me. Actually, Evelyn, I said, my voice clear and steady, there's something I've been meaning to share. The tension was palpable, a collective breath held in anticipation. Evelyn's smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. I can't have children, I said, the words ringing out like a bell. And it's because years ago, you coerced me into an abortion. The silence that followed was deafening, the shock rippling through the crowd like a wave. Evelyn's composure shattered, her expression a mix of disbelief and anger. Harper, she began, her voice shaking. This is not the place. Why not? I interrupted, my resolve unyielding. You wanted to make this about family, about legacy. Well, this is part of that story. The room was a sea of stunned faces, whispers breaking out like wildfire. I could see the carefully constructed image Evelyn had crafted beginning to crumble, the truth laying bare the manipulation and control. As the weight of my revelation settled over the room, I felt a strange sense of liberation. But it was short-lived, as the enormity of what I'd done began to sink in. The fallout would be severe, and I had no idea how it would affect my father or even Marcus. Evelyn's eyes were blazing, her voice low and dangerous. You've gone too far, Harper. Maybe, I conceded, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. But at least I'm not hiding anymore. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, the atmosphere tense and uncomfortable. Marcus stayed by my side, his presence a comforting anchor as we navigated the aftermath. But as we left the event, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me like a shadow. Back home, I collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me. Marcus sat beside me, his expression a mix of pride and concern. You did it, he said softly. Yeah, I replied, my voice hollow. But at what cost? He took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. You stood up for yourself, Harper. That's worth something. I nodded, though the uncertainty lingered. I had exposed the truth, but the consequences were still unknown, and the path ahead felt more daunting than ever. As I lay in bed that night, sleep eluded me, my mind a whirlwind of doubts and fears. I had reached a breaking point, the weight of my choices pressing down on me like a heavy shroud. But despite the darkness, a flicker of hope remained, a belief that, somehow, I would find a way through the storm. The morning after the community event felt like the calm before a storm. I woke up with a sense of dread, knowing that the fallout from my revelation was far from over. The house was quiet, Marcus already at work, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the decision I knew I had to make. I needed to see my father. I needed to know if he was okay after everything that had happened. The drive to my parents' house felt interminable, each mile filled with anticipation and fear. When I arrived, the house was eerily still, as if holding its breath. I found my father in his study, a place that had always been his sanctuary. He looked up as I entered, a mix of surprise and relief on his face. Harper, he greeted, his voice warm despite the tension in the air. Dad, I said, crossing the room to sit beside him. I'm sorry about last night. I didn't mean to cause so much trouble. He shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. You spoke your truth, Harper. I'm proud of you for that. His words were a balm, soothing the guilt that had been gnawing at me. But before I could respond, Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Harper, she said, her voice clipped. We need to talk. I nodded, feeling the weight of the confrontation looming. We moved to the living room, the air thick with unspoken words. Evelyn stood by the window, her posture rigid, as if bracing herself for what was to come. You've made quite a mess, she began, her tone sharp but controlled. I told the truth, I replied, meeting her gaze. Something you've been avoiding for years. She turned to face me, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and something else, fear, perhaps. You've jeopardized everything I've worked for. Your image. I challenged, my voice steady. Your perfect facade? Evelyn's composure slipped, her hands clenching into fists. This isn't just about me, Harper. It's about our family. Our family, I echoed, the words heavy with irony. The one you've controlled and manipulated for years? She flinched, the truth cutting deeper than any accusation. I did what I thought was best. For you, I said, my voice rising. Not for Dad, not for me. The room was charged with tension, the air crackling with the weight of our confrontation. But before I could continue, my father entered, his presence a calming force. Evelyn, he said quietly, his voice firm. It's time to stop. She turned to him, surprise flickering across her face. Thomas, you don't understand. No, he interrupted, his gaze steady. I do. And I should have said something a long time ago. The silence that followed was profound, a moment of reckoning that had been years in the making. Evelyn's eyes widened, her control slipping as the reality of the situation sank in. You're taking her side? She asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. I'm taking our side, he replied, his words gentle but resolute. This isn't about sides, Evelyn. It's about facing the truth. The room was still, the weight of his words settling over us like a heavy blanket. I watched as Evelyn's facade crumbled, the vulnerability beneath her polished exterior laid bare. For a moment, I saw her as she truly was, afraid, insecure, desperate to hold on to the image she'd created. And in that moment, I realized that revenge wasn't what I wanted. Justice wasn't about tearing her down. It was about breaking free from the chains of the past. Evelyn, I said softly, my voice carrying the weight of years of conflict and pain. I'm not here to destroy you. I just want to live my life on my terms. She said nothing, her silence a testament to the battle raging within her. But as I turned to leave, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a certainty that I was finally on the path to healing. Outside, the sun was shining, the world bright and full of promise. As I walked away from the house, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, I felt free. Free to define my own life, free to embrace the future with open arms. And that, I realized, was the true victory. The adoption process had been a whirlwind, each step bringing Marcus and me closer to the family we had longed for. The day we brought our daughter home was filled with a quiet joy that settled into every corner of our lives, a testament to the journey we had traveled to get here. As I sat in the nursery, watching her sleep, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was the life I had fought for, a life defined by love, not appearances. The shadows of the past seemed to fade, replaced by the promise of a future filled with hope and possibility. Marcus appeared in the doorway, a soft smile on his face. She's beautiful, isn't she? He said, joining me by the crib. She is, I replied, my heart swelling with gratitude. I can't believe she's finally here. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, his presence a comforting anchor. We did it, Harper. We made it. I nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle over me. We had faced the storm and come out stronger on the other side. But as much as I wanted to leave the past behind, there was still one piece of unfinished business that lingered in my mind. A few days later, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unmistakably Evelyn's, the envelope sealed with a formality that belied the emotions within. I hesitated, the weight of our history pressing down on me as I opened it. The letter was brief, but the words carried a depth of emotion I hadn't expected. Evelyn expressed a desire to reconcile, acknowledging her past mistakes and expressing a hope for healing. It was an olive branch, tentative and fragile, but genuine. I showed the letter to Marcus, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. What do you think? I asked, needing his perspective. He took a moment to read it, his expression thoughtful. It sounds like she's trying in her own way. Yeah, I said, feeling a mix of hope and skepticism. But can I trust her? He shrugged, his gaze steady. That's up to you, Harper. But maybe it's worth considering. His words echoed in my mind as I pondered my next move. Forgiveness was a complex thing, tangled up in years of hurt and betrayal. But as I looked at our daughter, I realized that I wanted to create a world for her that was free from the shadows of the past. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone and dialed Evelyn's number. The line rang, each tone a reminder of the distance that had grown between us. When she answered, her voice was hesitant, unsure. Harper, she said, a note of surprise in her tone. Evelyn, I replied, my voice steady. I got your letter. There was a pause, the silence filled with unspoken words. I meant what I wrote, she said finally, her voice soft. I'd like to try and make things right. I considered her words, the sincerity behind them. I'd like that too, I admitted, feeling the tension begin to ease. But it's going to take time. I understand, she replied, a hint of relief in her voice. Thank you, Harper. As we ended the call, I felt a sense of closure, a resolution that had been a long time coming. It wasn't perfect, and there was still much to be mended. But it was a start. In the days that followed, I focused on the life Marcus and I were building, the family we were creating. It wasn't always easy, but it was ours, and that was enough. One evening, as I watched the sunset from our porch, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The struggles, the triumphs, the lessons learned along the way. I realized that the themes of revenge and justice had transformed into something deeper, a quest for truth, for authenticity, for love. As the sky turned to twilight, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of promise. And whatever came next, I knew I was ready to face it, surrounded by the love of the family I had chosen and the life I had fought to create.